There's nothing that I enjoy more than watching some movie after editing for weeks. It has the adequate amount of stimulation that is more than satisfying to de-stress from day-to-day life while doing absolutely nothing. The movie does all the job. All I have to do is just watch, which is more than enough one could ask for. But there is something even better than that. More movies based on that particular universe, which advances the overall plot in a meaningful manner. Almost every one of you watching has some sort of film series that you saw when you were young that holds a special place in your heart. Those sort of movies have always been under the scrutiny of were they really good? Or how did they age? Or do they comply with the current socio-political climate? And more stupid questions. Just leave those old art/entertainment media to be judged under the light of their respective timeline. Why ruin all those wonderful childhood memories just because some dumbass got offended on the internet? I prefer keeping those beloved franchises inside that nostalgia bubble. No point in shattering another good memory by watching those films from a cynical adult point of view. Those fantasy worlds are what made our childhood feel more magical, with endless possibilities. And now, I'm not saying that movie franchises were better in the past. They have always been a hit or miss for me. But I certainly enjoyed the ones which came out in the past more than the ones we get nowadays. Call it nostalgia or just me not being able to get or stay interested in them for a substantial amount of time. The older ones sure did have some charm to them. But this video is not me romanticizing about the movie franchises that I watched in my childhood. And if I'm being honest, it's not even about franchises in general, but something which is on the similar vein with that. Just on a smaller and more thought out scale, that isn't usually driven by monetary success or made just because of public demand, or that being a deciding factor. Usually, those sort of films are based on something that is pre-established, like a book series, which is the best base for any sort of work like that. Let the content's quality and quantity drive your franchise, not the fan base, who will always want more, no matter if there's anything to offer or not. Which is why I prefer trilogies nowadays. Easier to digest as there are only 3 of them and has a definitive end to it. Unlike movie franchises on the other hand, which seems to go on until they can't be milked anymore. Another reason as to why modern trilogies or series couldn't stand up with the older ones. Those greedy producers have clearly understood the monetary overload that franchises can potentially bring. Now, I'm not saying that it wasn't a successful formula in the past. It has been known to work for a long time, but now it seems like it doesn't need anything concrete in terms of having any sort of substance to the overall storyline to work. Everything is a franchise now. No matter if that works with the first installment or not, they will somehow find a way to shoehorn some bullshit, trying their best to make sense out of it. Whenever there is a successful project, all they can think of is how can we extend that to make more profit, rather than letting it go out on a high note. All of them seem to lack any sort of plan, extending the storyline as they go along with no end goal in sight. Which is why my favorite trilogies are the ones which either had a base set out from the beginning or started with the intent to complete it with no regard to its commercial success. There are numerous videos that you can find in this platform about them, praising how well they are made right from the get-go and carried on until the end. But I want to discuss about a lesser known trilogy, which is often underlooked and hardly gets mentioned in the grand scheme of things, even though it is most probably the best trilogy which has came out in recent times. Well, as recent as it can get. Red Riding, the Year of Our Lord. It's a 3-part television film which was released altogether in 2009, adapted from David Peace's Red Riding Quartet, which was published from 1999 to 2002, with each novel releasing a year after its predecessor. And out of all those novels, 3 of them were adapted as feature-length films: Red Riding 1974, 1980, and 1983. Now, there is an issue with them being a trilogy, as they can be classified as a mini-series, and solely releasing on television doesn't help them. But in my opinion, the way they are structured, and keeping each of their length in mind, calling it a series wouldn't be correct in any way. The books and the films are a mix between real-life events and fiction, taking inspiration from the Yorkshire Ripper killings and dabbling its feet in political commentary, like corruption within official departments, with a hint of conspiracy theories here and there. One of the most unique aspects about this trilogy is that each film has been directed by different people, which is a great feat in itself. Not because it's the first one to do that, but it sure is the only one that was successful in being competent while doing that. But before I can discuss as to what makes this trilogy so good, I have to talk about the plot of those films. So let's dive into that with brief summaries of the premise that they boast. Don't worry, I will try to keep it brief this time. It all starts in 1974, as we're introduced to our protagonist, Eddie Dunford, played by Andrew Garfield, who comes off as an overconfident reporter working for the Yorkshire Post, and soon we catch a glimpse of the potential antagonist of the story, John Dawson, which is played by Sean Bean, who is a local real estate developer representing a group of unknown investors. Dunford gets an assignment to investigate about a series of murdered or missing schoolgirls, one of whom has been found on Dawson's property. And this is where us viewers and Dunford witness for first hand how powerful Dawson is. He is no ordinary real estate agent, as he bribes and blackmails the councillors to purchase and get authorization to construct a shopping center, something that will benefit him and the investors. And as usual, the locals and the underprivileged will be the ones to suffer, as Dawson has some control over the police department too, using them to harass the people who are currently living there. Dunford gets numerous advices to keep his nose out of all this and to not dig any deeper for his own safety's sake, something which one of his only genuine friend warns about before dying in an accident. Dunford soon meets a person who goes by the name of BJ, played by Robert Sheehan, as he gives him some incriminating details about the local officials, which were collected by the now dead friend of Dunford, Barry Gannon. His investigation leads him to Paula Garland, played by Rebecca Hall, a widow mother of one of the missing girls. The first interaction between them didn't go well, but by the second and the third, they start to have a romantic relationship. But we soon find out that Dunford isn't the only person she's involved with, as Dawson has been there throughout her life, way before her girl disappeared, as she warns about how Dawson has his way of getting things. But the blinding power of love gives Dunford the strength to ward off all the threats, beatings, and laying off the story, as he convinces Paula to leave the town with him. After getting her agreement, he goes to give all his findings to one of the officers he trusts, but by the time he comes back, Paula is nowhere to be found, something that he suspects Dawson has done. So he storms the party at Dawson's house, which he threw to celebrate the signing of the shopping center deal, as Dunford demands Paula to be returned safely to him. But he gets arrested by the corrupt cops who are working for Dawson and gets tortured in every manner. And after that, he's taken to see the dead body of Paula. This was never a fairy tale love story to begin with. The officer that Dunford trusted was the one who ratted on him and gave all those evidence to Maurice Jobson, who then destroys all of that. Numerous sacrifices gone to waste. After Dunford is tortured enough, the police officers leave him in a stranded place to never come back to the town. But Dunford is determined to take revenge, so he goes after Dawson, equipped with a gun. He finds him in his private club, where Dawson reveals that he was no angel, something which connects him with all those missing and murdered girls. But Dunford shoots him anyway and flees in his car, only to be chased by the police. And rather than trying to drive away from them, he deliberately drives towards them, knowing all too well that there is no point in running, as Dawson was just a mere cog in the machine which is oiled by corruption. The next one takes place 6 years after that incident. With the failure to arrest the Yorkshire Ripper, the so-called police department is forced to assign a detective from Manchester, Peter Hunt, played by Paddy Considine, who is asked to travel to West Yorkshire to lead the WYMP investigation and take over Bill Malloy as the head of the operation. But Peter Hunt isn't new to that place. He was assigned to solve the Karachi Club massacre, which was committed by Dunford, but Peter had to abandon that case due to his wife's miscarriage. Hunter's new team consists of John Nolan and Helen Marshall, played by Maxine Peake, with whom Hunter had an affair while working on their previous case. Another ally being Officer Bob Craven, which is played by Sean Harris, who is persistent in saying that the massacre and the serial killings are correlated, trying his best to frame Dunford for all those crimes that he never committed. But according to Hunter, the real Ripper has already been interviewed and missed by the previous team because they were focusing on the wrong side of things. Another suspicion being that one of the Ripper's supposed victims, Claire Strachan, has nothing to do with the Ripper, as she was killed in a different manner. His suspicion comes true when BJ gives him information about the murder, who is introduced to him through Reverend Laws, played by Peter Mullen. BJ claims that Strachan was a prostitute working for Eric Hall, a now dead WYMP policeman. His wife requests Hunter to meet her, where she provides him with the proof of Hall working as a pimp for Strachan. But she gave all the documents to Jobson, who claims to have lost all those files. So Hunter interrogates Inspector Dickie Alderman and Jim Prentice, as they mistakenly gave away that Strachan was most probably murdered by Hall and covered up to look like it was done by the Ripper. The covering up of all those shady acts doesn't stop there, as when Tommy Douglas, one of the officers who tortured Dunford, calls Hunter to meet him in his house, gets killed along with his whole family, showing the extent of power that they have. And for intimidating Hunter, they send him photos in which he is with Helen in compromising situations, meaning this whole thing has been going on for a long time, with them keeping tabs on almost everything. But the bad time for Hunter doesn't stop there. His house gets burned down, and he soon learns that he has been taken off the Ripper case due to some unspecified reasons. When he returns to West Yorkshire for a meeting with Jobson, he finds out that the Ripper has been captured and confessed to all of the murders. So Hunter tracks down BJ, the only person who seems to know a lot of information, who reveals that 5 masked policemen came inside the Karachi club after Dunford fled, and they killed all the surviving civilians. The only people who were alive in there were BJ and Strachan. But unfortunately, they were spotted by some policemen who managed to kill Strachan, leaving BJ being the sole surviving witness of that massacre. With all this new information, Hunter goes to the only colleague that he can trust, John Nolan, who takes him downstairs to the cells, where we see the dead body of Craven, the supposed killer of Douglas and Strachan. And it is revealed that Nolan was among the 5 who were involved in the Karachi shootings, who then shoots Hunter and plants the gun to make it seem like Craven and Hunter sought each other. Different protagonist, different timeline, boasting a new enemy, but driven by that same corruption we saw in the first one, leading to another sad ending. It all ends in 1983, where we focus on Maurice Jobson, who is plagued by the guilt of all those heinous acts that he committed by participating in corrupted activities within the WYMP. He was the one who tipped off Dunford about the police trying to put pressure on the Romani people of the place where the shopping center was to be constructed, in which Jobson had to partake under the pressure of Malloy, who, along with some other colleagues from WYMP, invested a huge sum of money to construct that shopping center. These were the investors, the ones who were pulling all the strings. The revelations doesn't stop there, as the so-called Ripper, a mentally challenged individual by the name of Michael Miskin, was actually innocent. That's not the only thing Jobson knows about. He was aware of the fact that WYMP is a corrupted organization who are willing to go beyond every limit to protect their high-profile figures. And all of this conscious thinking in Jobson began after another young girl disappears, and the investigation which leads him to open all the previous cases, which was helped by some information provided by a nameless medium. While all that happens, we meet John Piggott, played by Mark Addy, a solicitor who decides to explore the Atkins case by himself, and his inquiries leads him to Leonard Cole, the man who found the swan-stitched victim in 1974, who is now getting framed for Atkins' disappearance. And the police does what they do best: torture anyone who seems to come in their way of hiding the truth. And his death, as usual, gets disguised as a suicide case. Pigott then tries to get some information from my skin, which leads him to a mineshaft hidden in a pigeon shed near Law's home. It was a pedo child murdering group, which was ran by Reverend Laws, and the people who came there included some really significant figures of the society who abducted children, specifically the vulnerable ones, as they were an easy target, and it was only made public when they came from a well-known local family, which implies that there were more kids who were never even mentioned. It wasn't revealed what sort of position Reverend Laws had, but seeing that he was the one left alive by the WYMP and had some sort of control over them, it is pretty clear that he was the puppet master of the whole scheme, who had the utmost power over the strings. BJ being the other person who seemed to have survived this whole ordeal. But that wasn't the only situation he overcame, as it is revealed that he was the first child who was abducted by them, who then goes to Law's home to take revenge, but fails to do so, and only survives after Jobson arrives there with a shotgun, killing the Reverend. He then goes to open the hidden entrance to the mine shaft, as Pigott emerges out of there with Hazel Atkins, which is cut to a scene where we see BJ running away from that town and reflecting on his past experiences. Not a happy ending by any means, but it is far better than the ones we saw in the last two films, as we finally get some sort of closure. With all of that out of the way, which was surprisingly brief, I can finally move on to why this trilogy is so good and how it does that in a pretty seamless manner. Out of all the things that it does so efficiently, the most important one wasn't even in control of it. That being, the trilogy is based on a true event. I know, the novel is part fiction, but the way it took inspiration from a real-life serial killer and implemented that into the overall storyline is done in a very well-fashioned manner. Just like other notable thriller movies which are based on serial killers, the whole scenario happening in real life makes it more interesting and racks it up in the believability meter, one of the vital requirements for this genre. Another being the atmosphere, selling a mood that you haven't experienced before, which this trilogy does extremely well. Even though it has different directors who have distinct preferences in how they direct their movies, the color palette is consistent in each and every one of them, which seems like a minuscule criteria, but goes a long way when it's executed in a coherent manner. And that's the whole point of these type of movies, taking an interesting topic which hasn't been done in a large scale and delivering it in a way that others can't offer, which makes this trilogy truly unique in its own way. Another similarity it has with other greats of this genre is not having a happy sort of ending, something that I really enjoy, for obvious reasons, like it makes it feel realistic to a certain extent, as most of those occurrences don't end in a happy note in real life. The culprits don't always get caught, some victims never even get located, leaving their families in that limbo of waiting for justice. An extremely flawed system which fails to provide them with the basic necessity of getting some sort of closure. And this, mixed with having flawed characters, makes this trilogy even more better. None of them are perfect individuals who solve the entire case in a single night by brainstorming. That's not how things work in real life. Cases go unsolved and stay like that for decades for reasons that cannot be controlled by them personally. Evidences aren't well kept, witnesses aren't double checked, wrong people get convicted for crimes they never committed, and then there is the corruption, which lets incompetent people get hired for posts that they were never qualified to begin with, which makes the whole procedure of finding the offender almost impossible. Even if all those things went well, there is still the problem of people being, well, people. All of our protagonists were driven by emotion. No matter how much they wanted to do the good deed, something always stopped them from doing that. It was either love or being selfish and everything in between, which is another hallmark that this one shares with other noteworthy murder mystery movies. And it ticks all the criteria on how to make a good trilogy. But that doesn't mean it's a perfect piece of media. There are some minor quirks there that I have a problem with. The major one being that there is no grand reveal in the end, or the one it had didn't produce the desired feelings that I was expecting. Films of this genre relies heavily on subverting expectations, which this trilogy lacks to a certain extent. I mean, the person who was behind everything is a goddamn priest, who was a kid diddler and committed all those repulsive acts with various other rich old men. Like, come on. And the minor issue being that there is a lot to follow in a short period of time. The story isn't structured in a linear manner and is filled with dozens of dream sequences, which, mixed with lots of characters to follow and trying the best to remember their name, starts to become a chore, which makes the twist in the end even more lackluster. Oh, who could have guessed that the head of all those bad guys was someone amongst all those people with a funny name, who was ambiguous with his intentions right from the beginning. It wasn't too obvious, but wasn't something that caught me off guard too. And each film having different protagonists and them dying in the end of it is a pretty bold move, as that makes the character development feel somewhat hasty. But this wasn't particularly a character-driven story. It was more of a what they portrayed. Neither it has a set antagonist, with both of them representing a system and how they work under them, which then drives the overarching storyline, which goes along with the theme of this trilogy and what it means in general. It is not about the people. Everyone is expendable for the greater good of making more profit. The evil in here has no face. It is more of a how greed is driving them to eliminate anyone that comes between their path to riches. But it's not what this trilogy does that makes it so good. It's how it goes about it. From starting with a cocky journalist who is trying to outlive his father's name and feels like an outsider in his tries to solve something that is bigger than him, a perfect character that the audience can relate to, which then shifts to a detective with a troubled past who goes against every odd to provide justice, but fails under the fault of the system which is supposed to help him solve everything, and it ending with an insider who was involved in almost every aforementioned crimes, helplessly contributing and playing his part under the pressure from his superiors, with all of their tales concluding with them getting some sort of redemption, driven by obsession to do something for the greater good, or absolute themselves for their past selfish acts. But even in those moments of victory, there is a bittersweet aftertaste, which ends with them either dying or getting killed, or in the least endangering the lives of other people, especially their loved ones. In spite of all these minor dents to the overall structure of these films, it is still one of the better trilogies that I have seen in a long time, just trailing behind my top 3, which, let me tell you, is a pretty immovable list. And no matter how many thriller/murder mystery films one might have seen, this trilogy will be a great treat for anyone. And is it even a surprise at this point that another British media is triumphing over whatever Hollywood had to offer in recent times, which, let's be real, is pretty fucking bad. So rather than fattening their pockets, support these sort of films.